Okay.
This happened. Okay.
All right. Welcome everybody to episode 42, I think it is, of China Talk. Great day, great weekend. What? I think it's Monday. No, it's Tuesday. All right.
Okay.
Well, it was a great weekend at MSI as EDG took the trophy. Well, was there an actual trophy there, guys? I don't remember.
Like
There were
metal, right?
medals. Yeah.
They had
Okay.
medals and they have like EDG engraved on them now or
So we
something.
can
They're
continue
pretty
to
cool.
believe that Worlds is the only tournament that matters, right? So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Because there's
Of
no actual
course.
trophy.
so, so now if for whatever reason a new star horn rises or like OMG goes to worlds, that's what matters. Anyways, so what was your general take, guys, going into group stages? What did you think of the teams going in, especially EDG?
Um, Going into groups, like at the start, I said that it was going to be very close. The finals will be very close between SK Telecom. Emily's like objecting. She says, no, SK Telecom is going to stop them in the ground.
I
This is
know, like,
terrible.
apparently.
No, I
Oh,
thought it was going
sorry.
to be 3-2 either way. I was leaning towards SK Telecom because I thought that the SK Telecom style of like slowly controlling the early game would counter. I thought they were going to pick Janna, Gragas, like disengaged champions. No, it's just
Oh.
completely gone. Whatever, no one cares.
Yeah.
But I thought it would be very close either way, so.
Mhm.
I thought they were both very, very good teams, and I thought the rest was like kind of whatever. Even the TSM hype, I was like kind of whatever, and the TSM didn't make it out of group stage, so.
I think kind of whatever might be an understatement
Yeah.
if you compare it to their previous international
Yeah.
performances.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought they would be
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, in
Well,
terms of
they-
evaluating all the teams, yeah, definitely I'd say TSM came up most disappointing and AHQ probably came up the most
Um,
uplifting. Just,
I don't know,
I mean, in comparison,
Fnatic- I know
to
people were
perceived
also
skill.
saying-
Oh, Fnatic too, yeah, that's right.
People are also saying Fnatic is going to be like whatever, and then they took
'Cause, like,
SK Telecom to 5 games.
I-
so.
Well,
I mean, to be
in
completely honest, I
fairness-
almost feel that set was cleaner than the finals, so
Yeah,
I will
that
agree
was
with you
a lot
there.
more fun to watch. Like,
The
I think SK
EU
Telecom
final.
played pretty poorly. Like,
I was
Yeah.
salty as hell in the last stage,
Yeah,
in,
yeah.
in the grand finals.
but I think I think Fnatic played better than EDG did in the
Mhm.
semifinals, but I think SK Telecom probably played it worse. So
Jeez, I was actually, of course, Fnatic came out pretty amazingly. Um, I think the most amazing thing about Fnatic going into all of this was that I felt like they were a team that people really compared them to like a Chinese playstyle, but I don't know, they played a lot cleaner, though they
they
still have a lot of problems.
they understood what their compositional goals were and what they wanted to do going in, and they didn't play like the late game scaling champions we saw them play kind of in the finals of Europe, and they understood that if we're going to play for early game, we're going to play early game champions, we're going to play when we have certain items, we're going to do this stuff and all this other, and if we're going to make early game moves, we're going to just completely go all in, and we're going to build warrior enchant on Rek'Sai, which I'm still not sure if I completely agree with this decision, but it fit within what they wanted to do, so.
Yeah, and I mean they had a valid reason for going Warrior and Chansu, or at least they justified the reason for doing it in their own way. Fnatic in any case, just because they were like, yeah, I mean if if two teams are excellent and evenly matched, then the key thing is always going to be early game. So
Do you guys think that the format of the tournament really changed the results of the group stages at least? Like the going into it, everyone was criticizing best of ones, how best of ones were like are never a good evaluation of a team's strength, and that's true for the most part. Do you think that changed the results of who went out of groups?
I think it's a little different in like a regular season context versus like like a qualifier into a bracket stage context. But
Mhm.
I mean, I personally always still prefer the point system best of two format, regardless. But I don't really think it changed results because I don't really think there were upsets. I think everybody's placement is actually a pretty decent reflection of their performance in this tournament.
Hmm.
To be honest.
Okay.
So.
All right. So that's actually, yeah. I felt like
But it is funny that Fnatic like narrowly got through groups.
that's true.
I mean, if TSM did any better, they'd have to play a tiebreaker. So, but I mean, in general, just like the final placements, at least.
That was still my
Like everybody that
favorite
should have been in
moment.
the playoffs got into the playoffs.
That
So
was still my favorite moment in the tournament, probably. Well, like the final storyline is still really good, but my favorite moment, like single moment in the tournament, was just like when Koro was hiding in the bush that like no health, and then Wild Turtle just like face checks and then there's clear. It was so bad. Anyway,
Talking about, oh my God, by the way, a lot of things about that tournament that, like MSI as a whole, which I found really funny, was first of all, panning out into the fans, the camera always caught the most awkward fan possible. They always did it. It was like that one fan that just never, like,
just the one like screaming like a fucking like wild hyena.
and they
Oh
just kept it on him, just like he was like, "No, we want to hear more, man. We want to hear more." And so, like, so do you guys enjoy the tournament at all? Do you think it was like better than? Would you? How would you compare it to like, let's say, All Stars of last year?
man.
Like, do you think it was more enjoyable? Do you like the format? Well, not even just the format, because of course it's completely different ideas. But Did you like the change? I would like to say.
I think so. I think it's more relevant as like a skill gauge.
Hmm.
Like for once, it actually is just strictly a mini worlds in the sense that the best teams and not like the top 2 or 3 teams from every region participate. So as like a gauge, it's a little bit better. Um, and I did enjoy watching most of it. I still, I don't know, I still feel weird about the wild card slot, but I mean, I feel like that's something that's actually the best for everyone involved, even if like it doesn't necessarily bring the best quality games.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I don't. I enjoyed it personally. I thought it was a good tournament.
and if the wild card does win a game, right, you're in the situation where that could almost determine like who makes it out of groups. Or
That's true.
of course,
Yeah,
it never happened, but
Nope.
Emily,
we could have.
Emily, what do you think about it? Putting you on the
I mean,
spotlight.
I know, right? Like, especially since I primarily cover a wildcard region. I think that I mean, I'm always a proponent of more international tournaments. I'm always going to be on the side of, well, it is really difficult for wildcard regions to get anywhere anyway,
Hmm.
being where they're at. But as a general whole, I really, really enjoyed this tournament,
Yeah.
across like all stages of it. So,
One thing that I really find interesting that comes up often is a discussion about creating more slots for different regions. So, for instance, let's say if a region like Brazil, that's a good one, tends to like, what if that region, what if that region develops enough in which people are starting to argue, well, it should get its own slot, it should get its own slot. What do you think that
I actually think there
it's
was an argument that people had going in that like LMS didn't deserve its own slot. So
all right?
I was like actually really happy that they showed up big and
yeah, HQ really proved that and that, so now the discussion swings in the other direction though. So like going into Worlds, like, hey, like, LMS should get more than
Oh, right.
two
yeah, two
slots. So
spots.
like
Yeah.
that's how it goes. Like, and I feel like
Emily's like,
that's
yeah, I love that. I love that they showed up this time. Yeah,
yeah.
it's great that
That's
Brazil's
great.
not
I'm gonna
official or
punch
anything.
you. Like, yeah. No, but
Uh,
I mean, that's always like really tricky that's like the trickiest thing with international tournaments is like, do you prioritize like what the perceived game quality is going to be, or do you prioritize like including the most regions? Because they're obviously not going to be one and the same. Like,
Yeah.
no offense. Um, but yeah, so like now the conversation's swinging in the other direction where everyone's like, well, LMS should get 3 slots now. I
Well,
would have liked to see other. I know this is later on in the list, but like I would have liked to see a few other Chinese and Korean teams come to this tournament to see how they would have done
mhm.
for sure.
Speaking of Chinese and Korean teams, we are on a show called China Talk. Segue,
Hey,
Raz.
so I just wanted to say, as a segue to the AHQ thing, semis came around and it was actually EDG versus AHQ. So how do you guys uh, value that game? So it was the set, since it was a 3-0 stomp. Spoiler alert for anyone who didn't watch the series. Kelsey?
The thing about the AHQ versus EDG, just to set up some context, if you read a lot of the interviews and if you ask them about it, Edward Gaming will actually say that they scrim AHQ rather frequently. So
Mhm.
I think that's something that maybe the North American and European teams would have liked to know going into this to MSI. Maybe
Yeah.
they would have paid a little bit more attention. But the way they described it was that it's more like they never lose to HQ. They just scrim them all the time to kind of help them out.
Hmm.
So it was predicted to be very one-sided. I think Pon said something like, "The last time I faced Westor, I solo killed him 8 times in lane," or whatever.
Oh
So
my god. Oh my god.
Of course, Paul would say
yeah, of
that.
course, Pon would say that. But so that was kind of the context. And you could tell, like, EDG even played very seriously against Fnatic and Europe, and Fnatic. I don't count TSM in North America as an actual region anymore after that disappointing performance. I would have rather seen Brazil get a slot into the
Yeah.
tournament. No.
Oh my god. Okay, that's just going too far.
I don't mean
Nice,
that. I
nice.
don't mean that at all.
All right, Flame can go.
Um, No, but against TSM in Europe and Fnatic, you could tell that they were actually like trying to play very seriously. They went all out. They picked like these very serious compositions, but then AHQ they just like would go in and they would try to double turret tower dive at like 10 health. And so the early games actually went very heavily in favor of AHQ.
Mhm.
Which was pretty funny that they just like did that, but I'm not sure because they also played like extremely risky like that against SK Telecom, and I think that's just becoming more and more part of EDG's playstyle is seeing how far they can push their limits in a sense.
Mhm.
Like there were a lot of fights that why did you engage that, and then they would win anyway, which was I don't know. But and then there was that Baron. Does anyone want to talk about the Baron
Oh Jesus.
Which game? With the
in the
set?
first game?
Trying to remember.
Did you guys even watch the games?
No,
Come
I
on.
No,
watched it.
I did, but
I watched it.
I'm like the thing with game one is I'm so much more focused on like the adaptation and like picks and bans part of it. But yeah, I'm trying to recall. Oh my god, if you just talk about it, then I'll just go ahead with my opinions afterwards. I can't remember.
Emily.
I'm
I
reading
just like putting
to
her.
jog my memory. I know.
Okay, see the issue with all.
Wait. Are you talking about the one where didn't like
The
EG just like
Baron throw.
sacrifice themselves to it basically?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then, like, Cora went in with, like, they
Yeah,
started
they-
trying to
they're-
do it,
they're-
and it killed Cora,
yeah.
yeah.
It's like moths to like a bright light. They're just like, oh god, we have to go for it. And they just die. Yeah, okay, I remember now. But I mean, that's
has
EDG's
their
handling a Baron.
same Baron fixation that they always
Yep.
do.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if it does a completely different thing now. It's just like, meh, we must need Baron. We must strategize
Yeah.
completely around Baron.
So
But
do you think
yeah.
that's a new?
but hey, they got more early dragons overall
Yeah.
in the tournament.
I think
think
that's
that's a new
because
EDG
they. I think it's
Just
because
against
they
HQ.
knew the tournament meta. Like after the first day, they realized that the tournament meta was very dragon centric, so
Mhm.
they
Yep.
made the adaptation.
Yeah, their adaptation is actually really good because I think in the first, like, I don't think the second or third game were really all that close. Like the second was like okay, but in the first game, I think AHQ did a really good job at like focusing on how EDG plays and how to shut it down. But at the same time, EDG were really lucky because Pawn was on like a really heavy sustain AP damage champion in Cassiopeia. So I really liked AHQ picking Twisted Fate in the first game over the Fizz picks in the following two games, just because I feel like since they identified Deft as a primary threat on the team, they're really easily able to focus him down and lock him down and just gank Deft over and over. But the problem was, like I said, was the fact that EDG did have that Cassiopeia pick for Pawn, and he was able to make up for any lost damage when Deft essentially had to just kind of like play from behind and rush an early QSS just to survive and be a distraction. So essentially what was really interesting with game one, and I'm glad EDG still won this because it shows that they can adapt, is that Pawn and Deft actually switched traditional roles on the team in what they provide. And then yeah, game 2 and 3, I wasn't like feeling the Fizz pick. I didn't think it was as good as Twisted Fate at like ganking bottom and shutting down Deft. But Yeah, in the third game, I don't even know if we can like qualify that as a game because it was just like
Yeah.
Cora going on like an Irelia bloodbath, just walking around
Yeah.
the map and just like killing everyone 1v3.
And I actually,
So-
when I did my Koro interview on like the Mundo pick, he was like, I haven't really been playing Mundo in scrims or in matches or anything, but I played in solo queue. When I was completely banned out, I was just like, whatever, okay.
Just
So I
gonna
feel
play
like that's
them.
what the Aurelia was too. So
Hmm.
it was
Yep.
really weird.
So coming off of that, it's like finals roll around,
How do
and
we? No, wait. How do we
No,
feel
no.
about Def's Callista? Because
Oh,
that was
okay.
like a contention coming in, and then like he had a pretty good game on it against Fnatic, right? And then
Mhm.
the Hurricane first filled.
Oh.
Yeah.
I actually didn't really understand this whole narrative they were trying to push that Def's like Callista is like Def's like most dangerous champion. I thought that was like really weird.
Really? Someone was pushing that narrative?
I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
a bunch of
dude.
People were
A
actually,
bunch
and
of
I was
people on
like,
Twitter, and they're
oh,
like, "Oh God, it's Def's Callista," and I
yeah,
didn't like
and I was
understand that.
like, oh,
He's a
okay.
good Callista.
Like,
His win rate is positive in the LPL, but it's like I don't know. He's never
It's
been like,
2-1.
yeah.
As
Yeah,
opposed
and
to
it's-
every other AD carry in OPL who played that like
Yeah,
every time it
There's
was
so-
up. Like
There's so many 80 carries that are really good at Callista in China that it's so weird to single out Deft as one of those. So
I
I,
feel
don't know,
like
I found that really strange.
and he
In my
said he's like
I felt like it kind of hurt their picks and bans.
I'm
Like,
not
in
that
LPL.
comfortable, yeah. He said
Definitely.
I'm not comfortable on that style of champion, but you know, I think I understand it a little bit better now.
Emily, what were you saying too?
Oh no, that's all. That's all I was saying. Is like I didn't remember it being a power pick of his to the point
No.
where like I felt like it kind of hurt their picks bans because they couldn't leverage it, right? Like you
Mhm.
can't use it as a strength against your opponent if you either have to like if you have to ban it against it because your AD carry is not comfortable.
Yeah, I feel like the moment you make that narrative, you're just gonna call out every 80 carry he plays at that point. Be like, oh my god, that 80 carry he's playing.
Well, I just didn't really understand it
And
because
he had to play. There were times where he like
I was Esportspedia, so
defaulted to Corki. Like it's clear that he has a few champion pool issues in terms of like his Urgot I think is good, but EDG is a team that shouldn't play Urgot because like let's be honest, Pawn isn't gonna be reliable as a carry player. Like
well, I
That's
think
why you have 401 going 12-0-7 on
yeah, but
Rally.
I don't think like the mentality to just not pick Urgot because your team isn't good with him isn't like a really solid one just because you
I wouldn't
at
even
least
say
force
that
the
they're
denial.
yeah, I don't even say
team.
that their team is like bad at it. I would just always I think most people would agree that 9 out of 10 times EDG is gonna have a better game if he's on a carry champion.
Yeah, I agree. I really think it just comes down to denial in that case. Like, oh, we have to pick with Deft. You have to play this even if it's not your best champion. And I also think that they were intentionally holding back on Jinx priority until like the
Yeah.
really important matches as well. So that would be another explanation as to why he would be defaulting to things like Callista and Corki.
Because you saw he finally did come out with it in the finals and they banned it, so the Jinx.
Yep.
You think that that
But like after
Names,
they banned it,
EDG.
right? He picks
Yeah.
Corki.
Yep.
do you think that EDG was just really holding back strategies and picks? Like how would you compare, let's say, EDG to the second strongest team like SKT in terms of the strategies that they hold in tournaments? Like, do you think that they're a lot more diverse as a team when it comes to that point?
I think both SKT and EDG did a lot of holding. Like both of I
Yeah,
think
definitely. Especially in day one with EDG running that rude Tristana comp. I didn't understand that at all. That was really bizarre.
they actually talked about it
Yeah.
a lot. They said that Pawn and Deft were feeling jet lagged, so they wanted to try playing something safer to see if it would be
Oh.
effective against SKT. And they also said that so they wanted to get like a Lulu and a scaling AD carry. They also said that they wanted to see like how effective Bengi was on Rek'Sai, so they wanted to let Bengi have Rek'Sai.
Oh, okay. I could
and
see
playing
that.
against it, but of course, like the biggest problem with that composition, right, was that they had no mid game power at all.
Mhm.
because Callista's gonna get like the 2 item power spike, and you have to wait for 3 items on Tristana. So they just had no answer to anything mid game.
Yeah, and SKT's
So
mid game was god tier, especially the
Yeah.
Dragon comp.
Yeah.
and
So
people like waffled on whether they called EDG a late game or an early game team. I think EDG's like best rotations are when the towers have fallen. So like their best point is mid game, is when they make their best decision making and their best rotations. And they weren't able to like utilize that at all because they had this Tristana pick with Lulu.
But
So
that's here's what I love about international competitions. That is really it gets you to see the strength of certain regions in in comparison. So how would you really compare EDG's appeared strength in like say like, in the LPL to MSI? Did you see anything different, or did they change the in between like the tournaments? Like what I'm asking is that like did was there anything about EDG that was honestly I hate to use this word but exposed like something that you saw that wasn't apparent, let's say in LPL?
so weaknesses or
Weaknesses, I would say maybe strengths that you couldn't see while they were stomping teams. Stomp-
and that I've like towards the end of the LPL, I thought they wouldn't be able to play or at their crazy early game style on the new patch as well.
Hmm.
So that was something that was new, is that they went back to that after day one. Because after they failed that game against SK Telecom, Clearlove was apparently saying in all the interviews, "This is never happening again. We're not doing this again." And I think
Hmm.
that that was actually after they made that decision. A weakness exposed was that if they didn't get the early game advantage, they didn't really. They kind of combusted against stronger teams, like against AHQ, whatever.
Hmm.
But against SK Telecom, like you could tell, especially in Game 4, when they couldn't get the early picks and the early fights that they wanted and things kept going wrong. Like, Koro kept diving into 5 people as if he were, like, super strong. He was
Yeah.
like, no, we
that was
must
the
win
theme
an
of the
early...
tournament, really.
Yeah.
We must win an early game fight. We have to win early. We have to. I'm just going to keep forcing this until something... That's not how that works, Koro. It's not.
Yeah, they had a cast and then they just like started panicking or something. That's what it seemed like.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But I don't know if I'd say super exposed because I'm trying to think, and I feel like when teams identified Def as the biggest threat, Pawn was always able to pick it up and kind of put on the carry pants himself. So I don't feel like it was exposed just because they obviously had a backup solution. And the only other thing that I found that was like super exposed that wasn't something already known was like specifically a compositional problem, which is
Hmm.
like when they did run Jinx every time she didn't have her summoners up or anything like that, they would like, insta give her in a fight. But that's like just a fundamental issue with the champion itself and not really something you can you can prepare for it, but it's not really a team weakness. It's just a team identifying a problem with a champion.
Yeah.
And even then his performances were still stellar, even with SKT especially abusing that fact in the grand finals. So
And I think if you're gonna play against a mid laner like Easyhoon or Faker, and you use like the pawn strategy of playing immobile picks, and like he can't escape from fights as effectively, he's gonna dial out more, and those types of teams are gonna be able to capitalize on that. Like we saw it when he played Orianna and Cassie, he went like a little too hard in a lot of the fights. Like he did not look very comfortable, or he would try to press too much or overextend too much, and they would just like grab him and turn a lot of fights in advantage. Like especially if you remember that moment with like the Gragas cast in game 2 where like Clearlove effectively pushed SKT's bot lane over towards Pawn when Pawn was really low health. But the thing is if you watch like how Pawn was positioning at that, like once he gets out, once the team gets him out, he starts walking away, but then he like turns around and he's like, I have like 10 HP. I think I can still do something. And then like they still wouldn't have gotten him if he just like walked away and the explosive cast pushed them towards him. So like it was a combination, obviously, of Clearlove killing him and of him killing himself. So it's just his mentality to always want to like get that last bit. So he needs a champion with like disengage or some sort of mobility so that he can play that style effectively. And I think that was at least something that people could manipulate if you have like a stronger mid laner.
Hmm. And so we actually saw, yeah, we saw a lot of new picks, I would say, coming out of Pond. Do you think it was effective for him as a player? Like, do you think that he evolved in a sense to change his image as a linear, like kind of like a one-dimensional player, or was it just the same old?
I mean, I think I've made it clear that like he has this mentality towards playing, and I think it worked for them very well because they put him on his ear,
Yeah.
right, in the second game. I do think his Morgana was unexpectedly good because
Hmm.
we'd seen him play it I think once or twice in LPL just as they were like practicing him on Morgana,
It's just very
and
touching. I just wanted to start like talking about the finals. Yeah, so what do you like? How did you think the finals go like for EDG as a whole?
I feel like the finals were really strange, and I feel like things that would typically identify positively with the teams were not like adequate in this series. Like I feel like EDG's team fighting was questionable, which is usually their forte, and I feel like SKT's drafts were really strange.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand like the amount of times they allowed Annie, the amount of times they allowed like really strong Jinx compositions, and the fact I don't know like okay here's the last game I don't know if it was like a case of disrespecting the coach or what because obviously Faker hovered the Lulu pick.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Um, but I feel like there was just some like burning desire that had to be satiated with like the epicness of like the narrative or whatever that would happen, and like just going off the raw numbers of what he's done before, where it was just like, okay, man, this is I'm the clutch player, like I'm the star of the team. I don't lose with this champion. I gotta like defy all logic and. Of the situation, and just go LeBlanc because that's going to work. It's done. It's worked in the past, and I feel like that they just deviated from a plan that would have worked a lot better had they run Lulu. So I don't know. I don't know exactly what the issue was, but SKT had really questionable drafts, and there was like I was really actually kind of astonished at the amount of mistakes in that series. Truth be told,
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
and then just yeah that series like the second game where after they that the moment where I realized the series was just gonna be horrible, I think, was in the beginning of the second game where EDG has that ridiculous level 1 with like the Annie
Oh
and the
god.
Jinx and the Maokai and all this other stuff, and then
yep.
like SK Telecom knows they're there, right? Because EDG is invading, and then they get out, and then they decide to go back in,
Yeah.
and immediately three of them die. And I
I
was
was just
like,
like,
what did you think was gonna
well,
happen? Like,
this game's
I don't really
over.
understand.
Yeah,
Actually,
there was a
And
lot of
yeah.
really questionable decisions. Like, and then there was a time where they were like really overzealous in stopping the dragon and ended up giving up first blood and double buffs for it. It was like,
Hmm.
and that was the game they won, but still, it was just little mistakes like that. I was just like, huh? Like, it was just really weird for grand finals. I don't know.
I would say, like, the best game for SK Telecom was the first game,
Hmm.
and the best game for EDG was game 3. So,
Oh, really?
yeah. I mean, obviously the fifth game has, like, the crazy narrative, but I
Yeah.
think that was won in picks and bans in terms of, like, how they played. I think the third game was the best for EDG.
Yeah, I really did like game one for SKT, and I feel like that was actually an interesting case just because that was one of the games where SKT like barely prioritized Dragon at all.
Hmm.
And they like specifically went towards winning team fights and seizing the Baron control away from EDG, who obviously is usually tunnel vision on Baron. So it was a really interesting victory for SKT, and oddly enough, was the most decisive one. And I feel like it was the most deviant of their usual gameplay.
And they went from and ED like the this is why I think SKT also kept like a bunch of cards because the first Bengi had ever played Gragas was actually in a group stage match against AHQ and it wasn't that good. Like he would miss some
Yeah.
ults. He wasn't super aggressive early. But the second game they come out with like the first pick or the first game they come out with the first pick Gragas after EDG bans both Rek'Sai and Nunu. And then, like, he was really good on Gragas, I think. He played really well that game, and he played really well game 4 on Gragas. And I think the reason why Gragas, again, was so good for SKT against EDG is because it had disengage. Like,
Hmm.
that's a good way to punish EDG's, like, overzealous engage style. Their tendency to, like, push their limits and go back in with low health bars. Just pick Gragas, pick Janna. Why? I know Janna will like fell out of favor this tournament, but I think Janna would still be a really especially since like Wolf's champion pool was like exposed a little bit. If he
Mm-hmm.
didn't
Yeah,
get
for sure.
Alistar or Annie or Thresh, like he didn't really have anywhere to go. And
Mm-hmm.
then if they had picked Janna in some of these games, since he does play that champion, I think things could have gone a lot better for them.
Definitely. And it actually says a lot for, I would say, Bengi going into the tournament. Bengi would just like play Rek'Sai almost religiously, I would say. Like he was really comfortable with that champion for whatever reason. And then finally, like the adaptation going into the last set in which he was actually a lot more comfortable playing Gragas. It was like, okay, well, finally. Now, if you play Janna, that would be different in the sense that you can always disengage. You can always choose your fights, and that should be a lesson that they learned from playing against Fnatic. That was always like creating skirmish situations. So, oof. So yeah, that was interesting. I liked the idea of Game Five not simply because of the Evelyn pick, which we will definitely talk about, but because of the yeah, we spoke about the LeBlanc thing,
Mm-hmm.
and that they're always counter. Here's the thing. Back in LCK, I know Emily will like love this discussion. Not because of the LCK thing, but the strategy as a whole. See, SKT went up against CJ. Really
Yep.
close series. Game 5. Like they specifically had a team that should have absolutely destroyed the LeBlanc pick. Like it should have demolished it. That was not a good time to pick LeBlanc. That should have honestly been, like in my opinion, that would have been the series in which that like LeBlanc would have had its first loss. But of course, they snowballed it off of some poor decisions. So, and and I guess that's probably where I think the poor drafting coming out of SKT was I wouldn't say justified, but it should have been punished. And if it wasn't punished then it was like, well, what are you gonna do? Like they're just coming into this set with the mindset of
Yeah,
which like LeBlanc is untouchable. Everyone was going into that series with the mindset of which LeBlanc is untouchable, except for this meta. LeBlanc, I wouldn't say is shit, but it's probably one of the worst metas for like LeBlanc. You can actually have a team comp surrounding it that it actually stomps it. So I loved Game 5 because
Mm-hmm.
of Morgana, and Aaron spoke about it. Like, what do you guys think about that?
Um,
yeah, I definitely agree with the whole like I feel like SKT kind of had that as like their final like well if it worst case scenario like
Hmm.
the best player in the game will carry us to victory on LeBlanc.
Yeah.
And I felt like the other interesting thing about SKT like going into this set is the Korean playoffs as a whole were really weird. Like
Hmm.
the first like Jin Air CJ was just like awful. And then the CJ SKT that like as you touched upon, it really showed like that was kind of like Bengi's like re coming out party, right? Where he was like, "Hey guys, I can jungle again. Like remember me?" Because they replaced Tom after the first two games because he kind of
Yeah.
like looked really shaky, and that also goes into why they picked. Obviously, like the team changes when you have Easy Hoon and then when you have Faker on that team. So they picked Easy Hoon as their one sub, and they were like, "Okay, Bengi, like you know what? All the jungling is on you."
Hmm.
Whereas in Korea, they had kind of been like if you watch their progression over the season, they started weaning Bengi off jungling, and they kind of like had Tom slowly start taking over. Um, and I think going into this, their like other sweep of GE, they definitely I feel like they went into this with that kind of weird false sense of security
Hmm.
in terms of Faker's LeBlanc. Like, okay, we have that, in our back pocket. And I feel like EDG, like, they just flat out drafted
like
SKT,
they
in my
Big
opinion.
time.
they said
Like,
that
like really, it, like, by a significant
Yeah.
Hmm.
margin.
I didn't
Um,
even. That was the case for most of the series, but in the last game, like, holy cow, it was bad.
they
I was
yeah.
said
I was
yeah.
surprised.
They said they were sure that he was gonna pick it because like Faker, this is his champion that he's made his name for himself on it. Like he's picked it in a game 5 situation before.
And I feel like with EDG's bans, it was such an obvious bait too.
Yeah, it was.
Callista, Gragas,
And then
Cassio.
they
Yeah.
waited. They even gave it. And then like SKT had actually banned it all 4 games prior because Pawn will like first pick that shit all day long too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
And then
But
they
it plays really well into what Pawn does,
and then
like on that team.
SKT doesn't first pick it, right? And then EDG doesn't pick it in the first round, so they come back and they have to be thinking, wait, what? They're giving it to us still? Like, we want it, what?
Yeah.
I think
just
they.
really
I don't know how they
strange.
felt about that too, because I think they first picked Urgot too, so I didn't even like
Yeah.
prioritize it because I didn't want to blind pick it.
Hmm.
But they had to have been. That had to have been like really suspicious.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, isn't
Maokai
it?
Alley locked in, and then I don't know. Just weird.
Yeah, like already you have two damage reduction champions that you're not going to insta-gib, so...
Yep.
Yeah. See, this is what I love. I'm going out. This is gonna be a long, not even a long tangent. I'm just prepping this up a little bit too much. I should just talk about it. So this is what I love about LSPL in the sense that you can always kind of like you can at least listen into a bit of their comms. I know they did that during the season, not so much during the playoff itself, but I would love to listen in on the Game 5 pick ban comms. Like obviously we won't understand them, but hey, you know what? We have subtitles for that reason. We have
There's
translators.
translators.
Yeah, there's always translators. I want to
Someone would translate that for you.
like the
Yeah.
mental game about that. I really want to see it because obviously, like SKT, just they didn't want to jump at the situation. They want to kind of like tiptoe into it. Do we want to pick LeBlanc here? What's the game plan? And then ultimately, that's the result that we came out with. Was they got destroyed in pick bans alone.
Well,
But
in an interview, I think Edie, Aaron came out and said, like, oh, when they saw that the LeBlanc was locked in after
mm,
SKT's second rotation, like, the two Koreans on the team were like, okay, that's it, like, we won. Like, they were
They
already
said
saying
SKT no head is, I guess,
yeah.
exactly what they said.
do you
So,
think?
like,
And
Mhm.
Aaron said, I thought they'd lost their mind, like, yeah, to pick the LeBlanc, so...
Do you think
But
there would have
credit
been
to
a
Faker, that game
yeah?
was actually pretty close, given the fact that it was literally 5 champions working against this champion, and they still did like okay. So
Yeah,
I mean, that just goes to show how strong his LeBlanc
I was
is.
sitting there, and the guy I was sitting next to was Taps Tony, and
Oh right,
because I
yeah.
was watching the thing, and he says, "Okay, if LeBlanc gets 3 kills at 20 minutes, like SKT will win the game, right? By 20
Mhm.
minutes, we're counting the kills, like we get 1, 2, and then like he gets picked, and it's like, oh, we're good.
Oh, there we go.
It's not off the ground."
So my question is, do you think that because of course going into this tournament there is a one sub limit. By the way, for the one sub limit, I heard there were different messages coming
Right.
across for EDG. Who did they come in with their sub?
They said on their web
Fire Lily, right?
their official
Yeah.
sub was Fire Lily. I mean, it
Hmm.
didn't matter.
I think on Esportspedia it's listed as you for some
Yeah,
reason,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was Fire
And they
Lily,
had
like-
used picture on like the LL Esports promos and stuff like that too, so it was really
Yeah.
weird. But EDG said their official sub was Fire Lily, and there was
Okay.
actually this moment where I forget what it was. I think it was Clear Love. Oh right, in one of the blog posts that Senshao had, he said that like the security stopped Clear Love at the airport in the U.S. And actually, the security guard just wanted to like talk to him because he watched League of Legends. But he stopped him and he like took him back, and so Sancha was like, "Oh my God, Fire Lolly's going to be jungling." So
Oh god, man. That's like a very
that would have
different
been a very different
Oh,
tournament.
man.
tournament. Oh man.
Oh my
Well,
God. But here's my question on this. For SKT specifically, I was like, we know the different playstyles. Of course, they brought in EasyHoon. We know the different playstyles coming from EasyHoon and Faker. We know the different playstyles that are coming in from Bengi and Tom. That's his name? Tom, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
God, I'm always afraid that I'll like forget
it's
it.
a hard one to remember, man.
I know.
I find myself
It's Tom with
forgetting.
a 0, if that makes
Tom
a
with a
difference.
0? Are you kidding? All right. But seeing as the whole tournament, or at least like Fnatic, the games against with Fnatic and the games with EDG were very skirmish heavy. Do you think there would have been I would say I guess a different result if they brought in Tom instead of Bengi? Because that's what I've been hearing a lot in I guess like in social media. Everyone's saying, you know what? If they brought in Tom,
Yeah,
whole
that's the
I
biggest.
mean, I
tournament.
don't really think
argument.
you can say that because the thing, and like, I wonder that because not from oh man, if they just brought Tom instead and left Bengi at home, that like that would have been the answer. But I think SKT and like Koma and their coaching staff specifically throughout the season, they have been, like, if you look back at the pattern of how they got Tom into jungling, how they continuously, like, there are weeks where they just swap back and forth, Faker, Easy Hoon, Faker, Easy Hoon. Like, they really, really were trying to stretch or, like, at least do something with the fact that you could make substitutions. So I don't think it's as easy to say, like, oh, if we swapped out Tom, that definitely would have worked, because we saw Tom in the CJ games, for example, and like it was he was made some really poor skirmish decisions early,
Yep.
like
It
very
was night and day
specifically.
between that set
Yeah,
and the finals. So
yeah, it was ridiculous. And I don't know if it's because he just says he has a lot of confidence jungling against Lee. I don't know if they just took him aside and they were like, "Hey, you're cool, like it's okay, calm down." Like I don't know what it was, but for whatever reason, like and people were debating this about the whole Faker Easy Hoon thing prior to them going to this tournament, in terms of like, why would you not just take Faker and swap between Bengi and Tom, because obviously like he's the best player and et cetera, et
And
cetera.
Easy Hoon just wrecked Pond. Like,
He, oh,
holy.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I was really happy, not because I think like Easy Hoon is like way better than Faker, but because I feel like you do have to divorce yourself from that line of thinking where it's like, okay, if the like it's not a we play Faker because he's the best all the time. It's trying to develop two separate strategies around these two mid leaders that have very different play styles. And
Yep.
with the jungle, I don't disagree with SKT's decision to bring the two mids instead of the jungle. I think the thing with Tom, he is a lot more like he's more aggressive, obviously. I think the question would have been how well would he have done on an international stage, because I mean, it looked like he had incredible nerves in the CJ match, to be quite honest.
Mhm.
And he made a lot of really questionable decisions that we didn't see him make in the final or in the games prior. So I'm not sure if you can rely on taking that player to an international stage where significantly more is, on the line. So I don't disagree with the decision, but I am wondering if how SKT structured their team to kind of swap back and forth between those four players did affect their overall strategy at the MSI, if that makes sense.
And there are a couple things to say about this. One is that I do agree with your assessment that I think that the three players that they brought, and when we're talking about jungle and mid, like Easy Hoon, Faker, Bengi, are all players that, like, maybe Bengi's not going to crazy perform and carry games, but he's going to play like himself in high pressure situations. Yeah. He's going to be Bengi like every game. Faker's going to be Faker every game. Easy Hoon's going to be Easy Hoon every game. And we all know, like, they're reliable players in high pressure situations. They're reliable players in, like, group stage. They're going to be good to go, like, when you put them into a game, whereas I feel like Tom hasn't proven that yet. The other situation is that it would have helped them a lot to have, like, more early jungle skirmish, but at the same time, if you have one player like Clearlove who can play both, like, the early farm style and also, like, the late teamfight style and, like, the early game teamfight style, the early, like, skirmish style, and, like, he who has a variety of styles, like, that should be an advantage also in and of itself. And I think that there were times, there are moments where EDG could have benefited from a jungle sub too. Like, it's obviously, I don't think Clearlove is a good Gragas player, like, straight out. So they didn't have that benefit either. So it's kind of like, I mean, it's a good argument, and obviously SKT was very focused on structuring their team around it, so I think it would have helped them out more, but also, like, the fact that EDG didn't have something like that to go back on either is a valid point.
So coming off of, I guess. Oh yeah, go on. Oh yeah, I forgot you existed, Mike.
Oh, jerk. No, okay. I didn't have much to add because Kelsey actually covered most of what I was going to say, but I also want to point out that it's not like teams fully abused the fact that Bengi was there either. Like, he had so many games where he was allowed to play Rek'Sai and Nunu, like, an alarming amount of games. So it's not like he was really... It's not like it would have I don't know. With the combination of the fact that Tom doesn't have international experience, they knew they were going to utilize Faker a lot more in this tournament than they were in the end of OGN, and the fact that he has that synergy with Bengi that's been developed a lot longer, combined with the fact that Bengi was able to get away with a lot of his strong champions. I don't. There's like no way that I feel like Tom would have been able to enhance that just because of
Yeah.
the strictly how many games he got away with it. So
So like coming out of like the first split of which we saw a lot of like subbing and I guess swaps coming down. How do you guys think of substitutes as a whole? Like subbing people like players in. Like for instance, I know that SKT came out as the most successful team in being able to utilize that. Maybe LGD. But do you think it has hurt teams or like even if it's utilized correctly, for instance, SKT, do you think they would have been better off just using Faker and Bengi every game?
it's so hard to say because it's like it's really hard to determine if SKT would have still won OGN with just one team setup. I do think that there's a lot of advantages early on, and I mean, I think it helps a lot just shaking up strategies so people aren't like prepared for what you're going to bring on that particular day.
Hmm.
So when you're training for like a specific match, it's a lot harder in that situation. But in terms of international tournaments, I'm not really sure how fruitful it is versus just practicing with one roster. But it does. I think it helps ensure that you actually get to those tournaments. Just because I think domestically, with the way tournaments work in the like just in the domestic leagues, I think it gives you a bigger advantage. But it's really hard to say, and I would say that I'd like to see teams experiment with it more, especially with how esports works in China, where a lot of these organizations are actually clubs and they field like insane numbers of players on
Yeah.
each respective
Yeah.
organization.
Well,
So it
if
would
they're
be
gonna
something.
get punished for that at like a tournament like this, so they can only take one sub, like they're not really encouraged to do so.
That's also the thing. I mean,
Yeah.
we weren't able to see like a Pickaboo and Tom and Faker
Yeah.
lineup or anything like that. Or I'm sorry, an Easy Hoon. Like we didn't get that. Uh,
We know the real starting line starter for that team.
Yeah, but I mean, just having only one
Baker,
sub,
Baker.
like I feel like I don't want to say it like disadvantage SKT too much, but
Hmm.
it kind of like they couldn't really utilize what they trained in LCK so much.
And at the same point, like if you are going to field the same players every game, like that also encourages players to learn more champions and more different styles of play. So you could still get like that strategic advantage of playing different styles of games like with the same players if they know that this is a priority, I think. So it's not necessarily like obviously one player is going to be more comfortable with a certain style, but I also don't think it's going to be like obviously they tried Pawn. I feel like Pawn wasn't playing his natural style his entire time on Samsung White, right? Where he would just play like the wave clear mids and be like, I'm safe and good. But obviously Samsung White won the world championship, so
Yeah.
like that happens.
Worked out.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wanna
At the end of the day, I feel like it can only be worth benefit. And like, okay, and keep in mind that I mean, besides LGD, SKT is the only team that has flourished like significantly off of this. And if they keep implementing these same restrictions that were on MSI, then yeah, I think it's actually a detriment versus fielding the same roster, unless they expand like what counts in terms of like who you can bring and stuff for international competition.
I agree.
Yeah.
Because I think like I mean I honestly like with the dismantling of the sister team system like I was not a fan of it. I was not a fan of the larger
I
rosters.
wasn't either. It was so much more.
Hmm.
And I still don't know if I am a fan. Like I'm glad that SKT could prove that like it kind of works and similarly I know like LGD kind of tried swapping around especially with the Acorn and Flame. But that's kind of weird too because even though the play style is different, like their champion
Actually,
pool, like suddenly they like swap their
But I
they
think
kind of
by
swap their best champions.
But I think in terms of doing it, they actually discovered something that I think is really interesting because I actually think Flame is a better Gnar player than Acorn, and Acorn is a better Hecarim player than Flame. Like I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
That came out because
Which-
like I think Acorn's Hecarim is insane, but his Gnar is like okay, he's kind of like hopping into that thing. Like I'm not
Yeah.
sure what that is,
Yeah.
and then Flame is like 4 people into a wall every time on Nar. Like,
Yeah.
Oh
let's
my
go!
God,
I
yeah.
am the beast of tanks.
It's
Yes.
amazing.
And then his
Honestly,
Hecarim's like, I am a carousel horseman. Let's go going.
I honestly feel like when Flame is playing Nar, he somehow enters the mind of his team, like the enemy team. Is like, yes, yes, form up in a group, yes, yes, so I can
Yeah.
flash in and just throw you up
Yeah.
against the wall.
Yeah. But I mean, I still like to Mike's point. I don't think if you are gonna get punished internationally, like if you ask these Chinese teams or the Korean teams, like what do they want to do? They want to win worlds. Like I feel like you ask them every single time, and that's always the answer. Like we want to win worlds. We want to win worlds. And so it's weird because if everyone or if someone in your region makes a rotating roster work like SKT, that would make you inclined to pick up more players and try it yourself domestically.
Hmm.
But then if it doesn't work on an international level, like is it first of all, is it worth it? And second of all, like that creates this weird conundrum where you have and like I hate to say it, but like, you guys already brought it up. Like the finals was kind of sloppy from both teams. Like does it mean that going into a tournament like this, you will not end up playing at your best because your regional performance has trained you to do something else that you have to discard for international play? Like I don't know the answer, and I'm not saying that that's the case, but it's an interesting thing to think about.
Hmm.
Yep.
So I want to like maybe push this back to a more international feel, into a really maybe start rating how other teams would have done had they went to MSI. So for instance, let's say in another dimension, GE Tigers and LGD comes on to makes it to MSI. How do you think they would have done? Like, let's start maybe even rating this internationally. Do we want to discuss like with the same MSI format, so like only one team per region, or do we just like have it all like?
Just
I think
throw
that'd
them
make
all
more
in there.
sense.
Yeah.
Because I mean, otherwise you're throwing everything off, including the number of participants, and everything kind of
Right.
gets shaken up. Um,
So we're just saying in an alternate dimension that LGD is representing China and then GE is representing Korea.
I feel like for LGD, this is like a hard question to answer, just because I feel like the EDG that showed up at Worlds was still a little better than the EDG that showed up in the Grand Finals, but still not quite as good as the EDG that was in the early parts of the playoffs, or at least the end of the regular season.
Hmm.
So it really depends, because I would say, I almost want to say that LGD would have a similar or exact same performance, just because LGD is a smarter team than EDG, and EDG is a much better team fighting team, but EDG also is a little bit sloppy in their team fights in this tournament. So I feel like the area where EDG slumped a little bit, I think LGD at their peak could perform to the level of team fighting that EDG did in this tournament specifically, while also being smarter. So, but then again, like I think the biggest disparity here is coaching staff, because I really think that Aaron was absolutely crucial in winning that grand final.
Hmm.
So
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if LGD would have been able to do the same thing, but
Yeah, I don't
EDG
think-
was absolutely insanely intelligent in pick and ban.
I
So
think Aaron outplayed BBSY in drafts in the grand finals too, because he like when Jinx was picked to deny Deft, every single time they had some kind of champion that could get to an immobile AD carry, and that was like crucial in winning that series. I also think that, but I do think LGD's macro strategy is in the early game is significantly better than EDG's. Like, it's really smart in terms of lane swapping. Like, that was something that I think was underutilized in this tournament as a whole, was lane swap strategy and lane swap play. Like,
Hmm.
and I think LGD, a lot of these teams probably, there was definitely EDG got punished for a poor lane swap in their group stage game, right? So I think LGD would have had a huge advantage there because they love the lane swap play to hide TBQ. And like, the other issue is though, is I feel like Clearlove did outclass Bengi like really hard.
Hmm.
Oh yeah.
So I think that was a big deal, and I don't know if TBQ would have pulled off that kind of performance. But I do think
that's
that
also true.
I will say that I
That's
think
a really good point.
I also do think that LGD would have won, just based on, because early game ended up being so important. And
Yep.
and just think about, like, they had Oriana the first game
Mhm.
in the finals, and
Imagine
Pons,
Wayless.
Oriana was just like, it's just like, can we have Wayless,
Is
please?
there a Wayless out there?
Yeah.
But at the
Can
same
Wayless just
time, I
stop
don't
it?
think Wayless would play a Zero like Pond did. So like, it's the
Yeah,
trade-off.
it's really
so.
it's really actually hard to determine. And actually, I won't speak much of Korea just because I'm not very experienced in the region. But before Emily goes off on that, I would say that I don't think GE Tigers would do anywhere near as well as SKT, because the thing is, it's like GE Tigers is also like a kind of a late game team, but SKT did that, but like better in this set. Like there's numerous times where they were like horrible. Well, I wouldn't say horrible, but they were pretty bad early game, and they still came back from ridiculously huge deficits. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I
Emily,
don't
is this
think
the fall of GE Tigers?
the GE Tigers, like,
And there were so
Man,
many times when champion pools got exploited, and GE's champion pools are
GE
just
champion pools are
kiddie pools.
Not
Like,
yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
draft.
the problem with GE and like the reason why they were so successful,
The
like
champion puddle.
if you look at how successful they were in the early season, it's a couple of things, right? It's that a lot of their champions were just like in meta, specifically their mid laner, and then additionally, they were really good at preparing for other teams. Like I do feel like you do have to give GE some credit for their pick spans throughout like their dominating part of the season. I felt like they were a lot more prepared, and regardless of whether that's because obviously Como was trying out these wacky things with his team, trying to like do whatever, which now we know kind of, or like we can make assumptions about what he was trying to do. At the time we were just like, what is this first pick Xerath crap, like what are you
Alright.
doing, have you lost your mind, like and so I think GE now they were always a team that really prepared for their opponents more so than working on like their own problems. And when they actually tried to address their own problems, they're significantly lacking in terms of like being able to identify like what exactly those problems are or how to improve upon them. So I think if GE had gone for some like strange, bizarre reason where SKT just kind of falls on their faces in the finals, I don't think that they would have had a particularly good time of it.
I think they would have been third. I actually think Fnatic would
Yeah,
have been
like
second if GE
I
Tigers
think
went.
Fnatic could have beaten GE to be
Bam.
honest with
Wow.
the way they were playing.
uh,
I know that's like I'm sure people will like blame me for
No,
that, but
Hmm.
I
Well, that's
think
fair.
CJ would have been a better
Yeah.
second place team to talk
CJ or
about.
even KT to
Yeah.
be honest. Like
Are there any other LPL teams you guys think would have done well, or at least even like notably in the tournament?
Dude, obviously we're the elite. I mean, come on.
I
Well, the elite
You
would have
never
gotten to
know.
the grand finals, dude. Come on, you know how it is. Just two strangers on the team again.
Finalists.
I would have been curious to see IG there.
I don't think IG would have done that well.
No, I don't think IG would have done that well. Well, I still think they would have gotten top
They're-
three.
Their team fighting, yeah, I think they could have gotten top 3, but their team fighting is like good, and I think, oh my gosh, talking about drafting, IG is like the
Yeah.
god of drafting.
They are
Oh my
so-
god.
I just
Holy
mind blown
shit.
every time. I still can't forget that Vayne. I don't know why. It just like every single time I think
And
about
then,
the
like,
drafting.
I don't
of
know if you
Vayne,
guys
Everyone
watched
was shitting
IET. I don't know if you guys watched IET, but like in
Oh,
the
yeah.
first 3 moves or something, they managed to completely eliminate Spirit's champion pool and completely eliminate like Shia's champion pool. It's like,
Yeah.
what is this? I
They're
can't
so
even believe
smart.
this.
I really
Oh.
just want to find a way to translate their pick ban intelligence into their the actual game. I think.
But I think,
Oh,
yeah, their
God.
in-game play is strategically limited. Like, they have so many good players, but, like, they can't figure out how to play certain other strategies. Like, they're kind of goofing off. Like, I actually talked to Xiao Xiao at the time while I was at the tournament, and his
I'm
way
so
where
jealous, by the way.
I know. Xiao Xiao is like an ex-IG member for people who, that's 2013
Support
is
before
too
Kitties.
long ago. He was the support before Kitties, and he used to be their shot caller too. He said the thing about Invictus Gaming is that all their players are like really young mechanical geniuses, like every single one of them, but
They'd be so fucked without a coach.
they're not as serious as some of the other teams in LPL.
Mhm.
Also because they're young and they have a lot of time. So
But Zatai isn't retiring. Yay.
yeah, Zatai
I don't even
is
know
like
if
That would be
rejuvenated.
ridiculous, man.
Gee,
You don't-
but that would have been so sad.
Zatai is apparently rejuvenated by the EDG win. He's like, if we can beat them just once, it's like beating a world champion. I think we can do it. Let's go.
All right.
Let's go, Zatai.
And apparently he's like yelling at Kid on stream. It's like, no, you're not picking Misfortune in this game.
I think the best fallacy in
Practicing
esports
serious
of all time is
champions.
always the fucking transitive property. It just makes everything better.
Yeah. Have you seen the Esportspedia page that's like the transference of the unofficial champions belt? That's like every time someone wins.
Oh, I've not.
They need. I know that people on Reddit were talking about making one for players.
It started with the champions belt they're talking about is the Season 1 World Championship. So it started with Fnatic, and so like the next team that beats Fnatic gets the belt, and then like all the way up to the top.
Yeah.
Now EDG has it because so.
Oh man, God damn it!
There should be a
Something stupid's gonna happen. Because I mean, look, EDG. Who did they get 2-0'd by in the beginning of LPL?
Snake.
Snake.
Was it Snake? Okay, never mind.
I mean, it was
They
still stupid, but like
They went 1-1 with someone more embarrassing than.
Well, they lost to
split
King,
both,
a game to King for sure.
Okay.
yeah. Guy, I hate how King is the clown team now.
I know it's so bad.
And they
man.
were actually
How do
so
you guys-
smart in that game. Like, oh, it bothers me
you
because
guys think King
sometimes
would
King can be
perform?
really smart.
They're
Think
so.
someone- man,
It's like okay. Oof,
Lose your
okay.
coaching staff to GameT, and that's what happens.
Vayne in every game.
It's like King has the very few games that they win. Sometimes are amazing. Like I remember there was a time in which mid-season. I don't even know if it's mid-season. It's probably early on.
The 2-0 of LGD was so good too.
Yeah, the 2-0
Yeah.
LGD. There was the Demacia Cup between them and like M3. They didn't win, but
Yeah,
that
honestly,
was so
They
beautiful.
decided
Honestly,
last game to play like Jarvan.
And even though Snake had a shit playoffs, like I think King's playoff run was actually pretty good. Like they literally almost got to semis, so
Yeah, well,
it could have been a top 4 team.
I don't
Still,
know. King
it's
versus
hilarious.
Yeah, I
King
was just
versus
thinking. I was watching
Snake,
that
yeah.
game when they were like 2 up, and I was like, "Watch King win LPL playoffs." After all this bullshit.
That would have been fucking great.
But yeah. So, and then SKT like never brought Wave Clear after they subbed out Easy. It was really strange.
Yeah.
But I do
Yeah,
think
no, seriously, the drafts
Well,
are
they
so
also
bad.
put,
It was just
like
mind-boggling.
one.
I didn't understand why they had Easy Hoon on. Like, if you're gonna play LeBlanc in the, or not LeBlanc, oh my god. If you're gonna play Lulu in the mid lane,
Yeah.
why would you not have Faker in game 3? Like, that's
Would
the
that-
thing I don't understand.
Would that be some shit if Easy Hoon like won game 5 on LeBlanc?
That was
I
yeah.
would have loved that, actually.
That was my other thing with like, but I do think that the substitution won them game 4. I think that that's actually a very real thing. Because they didn't know how to ban because they hadn't played against Faker the entire tournament. So,
Yep. I thought it was a smart move.
um,
Even if it seemed a little bit desperate, I think it was a good move.
and the high prioritization on Maokai was another weird thing from EDG. They said they just like didn't think Marn, like I'm pretty sure they thought that Marn wasn't good on other champions. So
There was such a large respect for LeBlanc on SKT, and it's not even like coming out of Faker. Mostly when they played with Izuhun. The moment they played with Izuhun, literally, I think from the playoffs, literally since LCK playoffs till now, they first banned LeBlanc in
game.
every single game that Izuhun was in. Yeah, like it was just.
They banned it all for, like I said, they obviously think it's very first pickable. Like they ban it on red side, they ban it whatever. So
So that was. Any general thoughts you guys want to put out there about the tournament as a whole, MSI, maybe even like going into the next season of LPL? I don't know if we want to talk about that next episode, but
Yeah, can we have something that's like MSI but in winter, please? So we have like something to look forward to in winter now with OGN winter gone, please.
oh my god.
That fucking gap
I think
is
they're
just
doing
killing me.
All-Stars.
Like seriously.
Yeah,
They-
they
I hope
they
so.
teased another international tournament,
Okay,
like
good.
in that.
well, they
void.
said they're doing Worlds, and then during the winter they're doing All Stars.
Good, because see, the season 4 to 5 gap was just like fucking torture.
It was. It was.
I think let's see. I mean, it wasn't torture for me because there's a Chinese tournament every week. I was like,
That is
yeah,
true. That is true.
woo!
There's still shit to watch the whole time, but you know.
I
Um,
mean, I can go without watching, I don't know, like what roster will OMG put
I
out
do want to
next?
talk
It's
about like an interesting point though, which is like the S as a region. Do we think that LPL or LCK is stronger? Because we were talking about how maybe CJ or KT could have also done well, but we think that only LGD could have done well
Mhm.
outside of EDG. So,
Um,
do we think that there are like more top teams in Korea still, or do we think that there might be more top teams in LPL?
Okay, I actually really like Fion's article on this because I actually agree with him in that the breeding grounds that's been established for over a decade in Korea will always win out in the long battle. So unless China like continues to buy out top players at a ridiculously like large rate, which would mean that the contracts for new up and rising talent in Korea would have to be less than a year. So, given that situation, if they're really short contracts or they could buy them out and continuously do that, then I do think that China would stay on top. But until then, I've always kind of had this like Kings of Spring idea about the current way LPL works, and that I do think that when Summer and Worlds rolls around, that LCK will kind of edge out again, just
Mhm.
because of the way their infrastructure develops their players. And I even think that Korea did better recovering from Spring than I thought they would. I thought they'd be devastated a lot more, but they're still consistently first or second, and at least very close. And I do think in the current state, even now, I do think that there would be more teams from Korea that would be capable of taking the MSI title L- than the LPL. So,
I'd point
Mhm.
back to that interview with Aaron too, because I
just
thought it was really interesting what he had to say in terms of like Korea versus China, where they asked him about it, and he was just like, "Well, no, I think our like even my own team's macro strategy is lacking in
Mm-hmm.
comparison to what Korea is doing, and I feel like this is what like he basically said this is what we need in the LPL. We don't need like." Better players and like that article by Fion points this
Mm-hmm.
out too. It's never been about like just mechanics. Like China's always had really, really, really talented players mechanically.
Yeah.
So it then comes down to like how you're training the players and then how you're training the team. And I know like this is kind of a tangential thing, but talking to like people who coach or analyze in Brazil, they say like it's even if you watch high level play like as a at a distance unless you're playing against it, it's actually really hard to get a team to start thinking about those macro strategies immediately. And that's really where you need a staff and then obviously like playing against it more. So I thought that interview with Aaron was interesting where he was just like, no, like we're not even close, like in terms of what they can do with macro strategy. In terms of the teams facing off now, I think by Worlds, Korea will be on top, but I think right now the two regions are like
I actually
pretty
think
I still
stacked.
think as a whole, LCK is a stronger fielding roster for who could win MSI because like aside from EDG, who the hell is gonna win like who the hell's gonna
Mm,
win that in LPL? Like
yeah.
IG won't win it. OMG sure as fuck won't win it.
Yeah.
Snake sure as fuck won't win it. Like I mean, I don't know.
I don't know. I'm
LG and
really
EG are the
down.
only
See, the thing
candidates I
is, like,
feel.
I'm super down on both Jinner and GE right
yeah,
now.
but
So
at
if
the
you're
same
looking at
time, we're
what team,
talking about like top three
Versus the top in
versus top
LPL.
yeah.
three.
So
Like
it's
if
like
we're
Mm.
because
SK.
that's relevant because if both regions are sending three teams to
I like
worlds,
how it's me
then
and Kelsey arguing against
I
Emily
know. No,
about
it's like no. It's
about
like
like no man, LCK can
but
totally beat LPL.
fine.
Wow, we're
for
such we're
one,
such
except
contrarians.
our new Chinese overlords, yeah.
Awesome.
Um,
No, I think I. So you're talking SKT. You're putting CJ in the
and
second
KT, right?
and then KT. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think.
true.
I mean, people can levy the argument against KT that all their
Because
wins
it's
came in
no,
like the
right?
latter half of the season when teams like weren't trying. I think if you look at the specific strategies they came out with, especially their Jin set, where they had like the double banner of command strategy in their first game, and then they did this really cool like sending their duo lane mid so that someday could basically like farm the enemy jungle the entire time on Hecarim with a like TP Smite Hecarim. Um, I thought a lot of the strategies they actually showed in the latter half of the season were really interesting. Like they were thinking about it. So it'd be KT, all right, KT, SKT, and CJ
Mm.
versus
EDG,
EDG,
LGD,
LGD, and
IG.
I'll go IG,
IG.
IG.
I think there's very
Oh,
obviously
so weird.
IG's
Oh yeah, Korea.
super
Korea.
strange,
So
but
weird. Oh, man.
I think that IG can be good. They just don't care. Like
Yeah.
this is kind of my feeling
So
about
true.
IG.
I would
This
definitely.
has been my feeling about IG their entire existence,
For
because
years.
they're always like the fun joking team, and they're like practicing and they're streaming like joking all the time, and it's just
Like Kakao and Rick are only going to add to that. Not that they're not
IG.
serious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's the thing about IG is I don't think that they're as good as like the third best Korean team. So
I also think in terms of talking about not the number one from Korea and China is super thrown off by the way Fnatic performed at this tournament. Because like when you're
Yeah.
talking about winning the
Yeah.
tournament, it's like it makes it so hard because it's like, wow, would this team in this shape actually
I
beat the
think-
Fnatic that showed up? Because that throws everything off.
And
Honestly, it's the
it's
X factor
weird,
here.
like, what did Fnatic do between the EU finals and this tournament?
well,
It's
even
like,
even in their group stage games, it was like really okay. Why are they forcing this right now?
Yeah.
But I
Like I said,
thought
it's
that
useless
about
to do better,
EDG a
so they
lot
didn't take
too,
it.
right? The thing is that I feel like EDG is the best iteration of that kind of team. So I almost feel like a Fnatic EDG finals would have been more one-sided.
It would
Just
have been.
because
Yeah.
like Fnatic will try to do the same thing as EDG does, but EDG just does it better. So, and,
Yep.
like yeah,
That's the thing that I've always felt about Fnatic, and like Fnatic was a baby EDG in the sense that they would always force these early game skirmishes. They'll always have like Yellow Star roaming around, but the issue is that EDG will always bring more people. There will always come more like they'll always be expecting it.
well, Fnatic does do something like kind of similar with Huni sometimes. Like
Mhm.
sometimes like he will not go back to his own lane. Like he'll just go like bot randomly or
Yeah.
he'll teleport randomly in for like not a big team fight but just like a skirmish to make it 3v2 or whatever.
Mhm.
Like so it's not
The other
the
thing-
same as Koro, Mako and Clearlove's
the
kind
other
of
thing
like
about the
multi-man roaming.
Huni, about like the Huni Koro matchup though, is I feel like Koro can play a much larger variety of champions well
Oh,
than
for sure.
Huni can.
God, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That's not even a question.
exactly. So I just think that that gives EDG a little bit more variety than Fnatic and a bunch of different ways to counter them as well. So
All right, so we've been
Doesn't
going on
matter.
for
Hey,
pretty long.
Lamaukai.
Hey,
Who cares about champion pool?
Hey, Maokai. I don't have a champion, guys. Well, Maokai is open. Yeah, we've gone on for quite a bit. Do you guys have anything you want to put out there at all before we go into the waving territory?
So, like, I think at the end, you guys did one thing I wanted to comment on is you think LCK will be stronger by the end. The thing
Yeah.
is that now we heard them talk about like their scrims with Korean teams, like Chinese teams and Korean teams are scrimming a lot more, and we had Pawn and Deft actually say in that InVen interview that they weren't beating any Korean teams, but in the Aaron interview he says that we're undefeated on this particular strategy against teams like, so who you're scrimming? GE. So the fact that these teams are scrimming each other a lot more, I think, because someone made the point about you can, even if you watch LCK, seeing this high level play, you aren't going to learn about it unless you play against it. So if they're playing against it a lot more, and I think that LGD is actually like their macro strategy is pretty top level. Like it's really
Yes.
good.
Yeah.
I think
Oh, for
VG
sure.
Gaming's macro strategy, except for if you watch how they played in playoffs, which was shit, is like really good also. So yeah, and VG Gaming I think is gonna probably beef up their roster. We're gonna see some changes, so I think they'll be a good contender, and we'll have like stronger teams. And so I don't know. I think they'll still be competitive, just based on the fact that they'll have that ability to do that. So I don't think that it will be. I think it'll still be really close.
Okay.
Yep, I do think it'll be close. I think that the thing in question here with the teams scrimming each other a lot more, which is great. I'm so glad they're doing it and that China's earned the respect to earn that from LCK teams, is that I don't think it'll affect the strength of the two against each other much, but I think the gap between Korea and China versus everyone
Oh,
else is just
yeah.
going to, like, yeah, that's just going to extrapolate like a
Skyrocket
huge gap now, yeah.
Yeah.
So, Sure,
China,
that's gonna
Korea
be very
finals for the
exciting
rest of our
for
lives.
LCS
Yeah.
viewers.
I do think that we won't see again a one-sided final like we have, like a one-sided
I
worlds
fucking
final.
hope so.
I don't think that's I
mean-
don't think that's gonna happen again, like as it has the past
Unless
2
like
years.
all of the Chinese and Korean teams are on one side of the bracket, and then we have
Oh
like
god.
Yeah, I mean
please
that's the one
no.
exception, but like
all
I
the
really
top
hope
Chinese
so, 'cause,
and
like,
Korean teams end up on one side of the
They
bracket.
just
and
face
we have,
each other
like-
in like quarterfinals, and you're just like, what is this shit?
and then like Fnatic and or,
Fnatic
I
and
guess whatever
TSM face
whatever EU and
it's gonna be
European
like
teams,
Fnatic
yeah.
and Cloud9 in the finals. Like, what the fuck?
And then like the only
Oh.
Chinese and Korean teams are like the third seed ones, and they face like IG in the
Dude, like,
semifinals.
totally goes to
And
Worlds, it's gonna
IG
be the
decides to
bullshit.
play like some weird Lulu top shit, and it's just like
It's fucking-
The ties, you're tough.
Dude, I can
I can
honestly
play
see
Zed top lane, right, guys? It's like super good.
Alright, guys.
All right.
It's about that time. Shoutouts? Anyone? Mike? Shoutouts.
Oh,
Nope.
shit. No
Damn. Kelsey, shoutouts?
Shoutouts to the LMS region. I hope because they are
Oh, yeah.
streaming Chinese teams too, so maybe we'll have like good LMS teams.
It's the Ronald Reagan trickle down effect. It's coming.
Asian
Koreans-
dominance will be complete.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Hopefully,
also,
NA will do the same to VR teams.
I wrote an article. We didn't talk about this on the show, but
Mhm.
Clearlove's Evelyn for me is like a very significant thing in terms of like when he plays that champion. Like he always plays it in high pressure situations. It's not really known to be in meta. It counters Nunu, but like why would you play that shit into LeBlanc? It's like super squishy. So I wrote an article about like Clearlove in the finals playing Evelyn. Apparently it made Frostgren cry.
Oh my.
So
Was it
Yeah.
like American tears or at least Chinese? I don't know how. What's
It's
the?
it's a really good article because it's a really good article because it kind of like makes the it kind of makes like the grand finals like almost feel like this anime emotional like finals for some reason because like Faker's like, no, I gotta play LeBlanc against all odds, and Cleveland's like, no, man.
I'll play my best champion.
Yeah,
It's
it
my
is very
champion, and they're just like,
shonen tournament art.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Because like as it mentions in Kelsey's article, is that it's not really anything like it's not like significantly above others' win rates. Like he has a lot of higher win rate champions by far, but like it's like probably like a 2 to 3, what was it, like 66% win rate or something.
yeah.
But it just happens to work in the situations that are most important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Emily, what do you have to say? Shoutouts.
Goro's a better top laner than Marin, and I told people so, and they didn't believe me. So that's my
Surprised
shout out.
that was like an
Shout
argument.
out to Koro. Happy birthday. Good
By the way,
job.
Yeah,
Can we
Shungru
talk about-
Quila.
So many birthdays in that tournament.
I know, seriously.
Seriously.
Can we talk about the Koro prophet, Kelsey Moser?
Yeah,
he-
Koro.
she-
Like
she-
almost exactly a year ago, I was like,
No.
Koro is the best player. No,
no one.
I didn't think
everyone
he'd ever
talks-
be like this kind of beast though. So
Yeah, it's actually he's gotten really good.
We shot down your confidence by saying, "Well, guess who replaced you, Pawn?" But you still had Koro,
I still had Koro.
and you survived.
Yeah, speaking of execution of talent, like I feel like every single player on that team has gotten better this year. Like Koro,
Oh, yeah.
Clear Love, even Pawn, Deft. Who Mako was
really-
literally not playing on even an amateur team last year.
Yeah.
And he
Seriously.
was
Mako.
literally the only player in that series who played well every single game. Like,
Yeah, he was the most consistent.
MSI was a really awesome tournament for rookies. Like really.
Mhm. That's where
See, maybe if Tom had gone, he
yeah, he would have gotten the rookie buff.
he would have had the same buff.
that
yeah.
would have been a great.
we
exit.
figured it out.
That one
That's
would've
what
had-
people
that
are
one would've had
talking
you.
about. They're talking about the rookie buff.
We're talking about the rookie buff. You know who would have been perfectly fine there?
IG.
Yeah.
Ah.
All right, guys, let's wait.
None of them are rookies. They're just like all 5.
Okay. Carry off.
Kind of whatever. The TSM didn't make it out of group stage, so
I think kind of whatever might be an understatement
Yeah.
if you compare it to their previous international
Yeah.
performances.
yeah.
Yeah.
I thought they would be.
Yeah.
third,
I mean, in terms of
Well, they-
evaluating all the teams, yeah, definitely I'd say TSM came up most disappointing, and AHQ probably came up the most uplifting.
I don't know.
I mean,
Fnatic,
in comparison to
people were
perceived
also
skill.
saying,
Oh, Fnatic too. Yeah, that's right.
People are also saying Fnatic is going to be like whatever, and then they took
'Cause, like,
SK Telecom to 5 games.
I-
Well,
So.
I mean, to
in
be completely honest,
fairness,
I almost feel that set was cleaner than the finals. So
Yeah,
I
that
will
set
agree
was
with
a
you
lot
there.
more fun to watch. Like,
the
I think SK
EU
Telecom
finals.
played pretty poorly. Like,
I was
Yeah.
salty as hell in the last stage
Yeah.
in the grand finals.
but I think I think Fnatic played better than EDG did in the
Mhm.
semifinals, but I think SK Telecom probably played it worse. So.
Jeez, I was actually, of course, Fnatic came out pretty amazingly. Um, I think the most amazing thing about Fnatic going into all of this was that I felt like they were a team that people really compared them to like a Chinese playstyle, but I don't know, they played a lot cleaner, though they
They
still have a lot of problems.
they understood what their compositional goals were and what they wanted to do going in, and they didn't play like the late game scaling champions we saw them play kind of in the finals of Europe, and they understood that if we're going to play for early game, we're going to play early game champions, we're going to play when we have certain items, we're going to do this stuff and all this other, and if we're going to make early game moves, we're going to just completely go all in, and we're going to build warrior enchant on Rek'Sai, which I'm still not sure if I completely agree with this decision. But it fit within what they wanted to do, so.
Yeah, and I mean they had a valid reason for going Warrior Enchant too, or at least they justified the reason for doing it. In their
Hold on.
Okay.
This happened. Okay.
All right. Welcome everybody to episode 42, I think it is, of China Talk. Great day, great weekend. What? I think it's Monday. No, it's Tuesday. All right.
Okay.
Well, it was a great weekend at MSI as EDG took the trophy. Well, was there an actual trophy there, guys? I don't remember.
There were
medals, right?
medals. Yeah.
They had medals and they have like EDG engraved on them now or
So we
something.
can continue
pretty
to
cool.
believe that Worlds is the only tournament that matters, right? So.
Yeah, yeah.
Because there's
Of
no
course.
actual trophy.
so now if for whatever reason a new star horn rises or like OMG goes to Worlds, that's what matters. Anyways, so what was your general take, guys, going into group stages? What did you think of the teams going in, especially EDG?
Going into groups, like at the start, I said that it was going to be very close. The finals will be very close between SK Telecom. Emily's like objecting. She says, no, SK Telecom is going to stop them in the ground.
I know, like, apparently.
No, I thought it was
sorry.
going to be 3-2 either way. I was leaning towards SK Telecom because I thought that the SK Telecom style of like slowly controlling the early game would counter. I thought they were gonna pick Janna, Gragas, like disengaged champions. No, it's just completely gone. Whatever, no one cares.
Yeah.
But I thought it would be very close either way. So, I thought they were both very, very good teams, and I thought the rest was like kind of whatever. Even the TSM hype, I was like,
General whole, I really, really enjoyed this tournament. Across like all stages of it. So.
One thing that I really find interesting that comes up often is a discussion about creating more slots for different regions. So, for instance, let's say if a region like Brazil, that's a good one, tends to, like, what if that region, what if that region develops enough in which people are starting to argue, well, it should get its own slot, it should get its own slot. What do you think that
I actually think there was an argument that people had going in that like LMS didn't deserve its own slot, so
Alright.
I was like actually really happy that they showed up big and
Yeah, HQ really proved that they, and now the discussion swings in the other direction though. So like going into Worlds, like, hey, like LMS should get more than
Oh, right.
Yeah.
slots.
two
So
slots,
like
yeah.
that's how it goes. Like, and I feel
Emily's
like
like, yeah, I love that they showed up this time. Yeah,
yeah,
it's great that
that's
Brazil's
great,
not
I'm gonna
official or
punch
anything.
you. Like, yeah.
Uh,
No, but I mean, that's always like really tricky that's like the trickiest thing with international tournaments is like, do you prioritize like what the perceived game quality is going to be, or do you prioritize like including the most regions, because they're obviously not going to be one and the same, like,
Yeah.
no offense. But yeah, so like now the conversation's swinging in the other direction where everyone's like, well, OMS should get 3 slots now. I
Well,
would have liked to see other. I know this is later on in the list, but like I would have liked to see a few other Chinese and Korean teams come to this tournament to see how they would have done
mhm.
for sure.
Speaking of Chinese and Korean teams, we are on a show called China Talk. Segue,
Hey,
Raz.
so I just fan possible. They always did it. It was like that one fan that just never like
Just the one like screaming like a fucking like wild hyena.
and they
Oh man.
just kept it on him. Just like he was like, no, we want to hear more, man. We want to hear more. And so like, so do you guys enjoy the tournament at all? Do you think it was like better than would you how would you compare it to like let's say All Stars of last year?
Hmm.
Like do you think it was more enjoyable? Do you like the format? Well, not even just the format, because of course it's completely different ideas. But did you like the change? I would like to say.
I think so. I think it's more relevant as like a skill gauge.
Hmm.
Like for once, it actually is just strictly a mini worlds, in the sense that the best teams and not like the top 2 or 3 teams from every region participate. So as like a gauge, it's a little bit better. Um, and I did enjoy watching most of it. I still, I don't know, I still feel weird about the wild card slot, but I mean, I feel like that's something that's actually the best for everyone involved, even if like it doesn't necessarily bring the best quality games.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I don't. I enjoyed it personally. I thought it was a good tournament.
And if the wild card does win a game, right, you're in the situation where that could almost determine like who makes it out of groups. Or
That's true.
of course
Yeah,
it
in
never
this
it
tournament,
never happened, but
Nope.
Emily,
this tournament we could have.
Emily, what do you think about it? Putting you on the
I mean,
spotlight.
I know, right? Like, especially since I primarily cover wildcard region. I think that I mean, I'm always a proponent of more international tournaments. I'm always going to be on the side of, well, it is really difficult for wildcard regions to get anywhere anyway,
Hmm.
being where they're at. But as a
Their own way, Fnatic in any case, just because they were like, yeah. I mean, if 2 teams are excellent and evenly matched, then the key thing is always going to be early game. So
Do you guys think that the format of the tournament really changed the results of the group stages at least? Like the going into it, everyone was criticizing best of ones, how best of ones were like are never a good evaluation of a team's strength, and that's true for the most part. Do you think that changed the results of who went out of groups?
I think it's a little different in like a regular season context versus like like a qualifier into a bracket stage context. But
Hmm.
I mean, I personally always still prefer the point system best of 2 format, regardless. But I don't I don't really think it changed results because I don't really think there were upsets. I think everybody's placement is actually a pretty decent reflection of their performance in this tournament.
Hmm.
To be honest.
Okay.
So,
All right. So that's actually, yeah. I felt like the
but it is funny that Fnatic like narrowly got through groups.
that's true.
I mean, if TSM did any better, they'd have to play a tiebreaker. So, but I mean, in general, just like the final placements, at least.
that was
Hmm.
still my
Like everybody that
favorite
should have been in
moment.
the playoffs got into the playoffs.
That
So,
was still my favorite moment in the tournament, probably. Well, like the final storyline is still really good, but my favorite moment, like single moment in the tournament, was just like when Koro was hiding in the bush, that like no health, and then Wild Turtle just like face checks, and then there's clear. It was so bad. Anyway,
Talking
um,
about, oh my God, by the way, a lot of things about that tournament that like MSI as a whole,
mhm.
which I found really funny. Was first of all, panning out into the fans, the camera always caught the most awkward